listening to Coffee and Conversation with Recovery Advocate Network, the nonprofit organization that strives to address the staggering disparity in resource availability for individuals suffering from mental health disorders, processing disorders, addictions, trauma healing, and sexual identity challenges. Together, we strive to end the stigma associated with these challenges so that true healing can begin. Welcome back to Coffee and Conversation with Recovery Advocate Network. I'm your host, Ange, and welcome you to episode number 51. Today's guest is Dr. Corey Latta, who is a therapist, writer, and college professor. Dr. Latta has over 20 years of experience teaching in both person and online, in addition to serving in leadership and administrative roles. He's also the author of 5 books and numerous articles, and he loves poetry, which you'll find out in this episode. In this conversation, he shares his personal journey from academia to therapy and his passion for helping families and individuals struggling with addiction. He discusses the importance of deep connections and highlights the power of literature in therapy and the role of storytelling in healing. During this conversation, we discuss topics such as choosing reactions and decisions, the challenge of transitioning from treatment to home, identifying feelings and needs, psychodrama as a therapeutic technique, dealing with defensiveness in psychodrama, and navigating tense moments during the experience. We also delve into healing the inner child, passion for family, couples, and story work, and using books and imagination for healing. Corey emphasizes the importance of self-awareness, vulnerability, and exploring one's emotions and needs for personal growth and healing. Together, we also explore the concept of 2 adulthoods and the importance of making healthy choices in the second adulthood. I hope we've piqued your interest. Okay, so enough of this. Let's do it. But first, our 3 C's of engagement. Number 1, click that subscribe button. Go ahead and like the episode. You're going to like it, so just go ahead and do it. And click the notifications to make sure you don't miss future episodes. The second C is commit. Commit to staying for the full episode. Oh my gosh, we talked about so many different treatment modalities. You could even experience me in real time trying to role play and really kind of learning enough about the way that I heard what he said, which wasn't what he said. It was so impactful and healing for me. You definitely want to make sure you hear that. So commit to staying for the full episode. And then finally, what is our last C? Well, of course, it's our coffee. So sit back. Well, first, fill up your coffee. Then sit back, relax, and let's get started. Well, listeners, I'm very excited this morning. We're recording this on a Saturday morning to talk with Dr. Latta. Did I say that correctly?
Yep, Latta, that's it.
Awesome. And so what I would like to do is let you introduce yourself and tell the listeners why you're here today, maybe what you're passionate about that Rand's doing, what you're passionate about the listeners learning about the work that you're doing. I wondered how, because I was looking at your bio ahead of time and I thought, okay, so he was in sales. And first off, you're in Memphis. It appears you've lived in Memphis your whole life. Is that a true statement?
Yep. For the most part, I moved to South Mississippi to do my PhD. And then I lived in London for a couple of months, which is great. And then came back. So the sales thing, that's not me at all. Like that's not even close to who I am. That was a terrible experience. It actually was a really good experience in that it stretched me. But that was sort of one of these provisional. It was there when I needed it because I essentially sort of lost everything for a period of time. So I was okay at it, but that's not, like, sales is not my thing.
Yeah. So I can appreciate that. So I had an instance in my life when I first went off to college and on an Air Force scholarship. And they had approved that if I passed my MCAT, that I could then go to med school. My parents were not around when I was growing up, and I really wanted to be a really good mother. And so I thought I couldn't be a good mother and be a good doctor at the same time. So in my infinite wisdom at 19, I dropped my scholarship, at which point my dad said, if you drop your scholarship, you're never getting another dime from us, which I actually love at this stage. You know, I'm 48 now, and I can say everything I've done myself, which I'm so proud of. Right. Anyway, so I did something similar. Like I was an out-of-state student. I needed to get in-state tuition. So I needed to work for a year to get in-state tuition. And I went to work at a finance company, and I was really good at it because I was really good at collecting debt. You know what collecting debt and all that is? It's just relationship building.
Right.
Yeah, and so much of life is relationship building. So much of sales, even though we say we don't love sales, I also say the same thing. I don't love sales. However, we're all selling something at some point. We're selling ourselves.
Yeah,
right?
100%. And I've started, later or earlier in 2023, I started making content on Instagram. I was telling you about earlier, and I realized like, oh, this kind of is sales. Like I'm selling an idea in these little clips I'm making about some sort of therapeutic or relational thing. But you're right. At the heart of it is just relationships.
Well, and I think too, so going back, I worked in finance. I was really good at it, but I hated it. Yeah. So we've had many episodes that we've talked about on this podcast about life is entirely short to do something that you hate.
Yes.
And also you said something just now that was amazing, because you said you realize after the fact, wait, I'm kind of in sales. Well, I think someone who really is successful in sales, they're not selling something for something to be transactional. They're selling something because they believe in whatever the product is. So I'm absolutely selling to the world that I think everyone's voice should be heard, and that I think everyone should consider mental health as a regular part of health and all these types of things, because I believe it. I'm not selling a particular service. No one's buying anything from me, but I'm absolutely selling that part. So love it. Okay. So you were in sales. You had this major life event, and you were in sales as a bridge.
Well, no. So I was in academia and working in the church. So that was my background, and then had this life implosion because of my love addiction, and my sex addiction was my thing. And just this untreated, wounded part of me that ends up blowing up everything. So I end up with nothing. And then I'm looking for jobs, and I'm teaching here and there and all this stuff. And then these positions open up in sales, which was like, okay, I can like take care of my kids and pay my bills and all this kind of thing. So that was that. It was a very short period of time. I was only doing it for, I don't know, a year and a half, maybe something like that. Maybe, I mean, it was not long, but my entire background leading up to that was in the classroom. It still is in many ways.
I love that you shared that about the sex addiction. We talk about sex addiction and destigmatizing and demystifying it on episode 6, this podcast. Okay. My dear friend Jason was amazing. And one of the things we talk about, and you've briefly mentioned childhood abuse and some of those things tying into, is that, and he has a podcast, which I should throw out. It's the Bay Area Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast. It's amazing.
Nice.
And I love just hearing people from all walks of life talk about these challenges, because I think in general, myself included, at one stage, I had this idea of this is what this type of addict looks like, or this is what this type of salesperson looks like, or this is what, and then the older that I've gotten and the more blessed I've been to meet unique people, I no longer do that, because there's no stereotype that fits anyone. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, 100%. Entering into recovery, and mine was more, there was definitely the sexual component to it. But as I did more work on myself, I realized it was really a love addiction, like this just desire to connect and be validated and affirmed, and just really want to be loved. Going back to a childhood in which those experiences weren't there. And I didn't uncover, I mean, honestly, I went to treatment back in September of 2023. After doing a ton of, because I went through this breakup that broke me. And I had childhood abuse, like legit, that I had buried. I had no idea, that did not come out until essentially leading up to treatment. So it's entering, to your point though, entering recovery communities that I realized, like, man, there is no one kind of person here. I mean, like, everyone comes to this place from all these different experiences and stories. And the one common denominator that I think is really beautiful is we just need help. Like, we all need help.
Well, and I will tell you this, some of my favorite people that I know I've met through treatment programs or 12-step programs or whatever. I have said in previous episodes that, and Rand, we will say that our experiences and our voices are our own. We don't speak for any organization. But I will say that there are some things I wish that individuals all learned in middle school, and they are DBT skills, so dialectical behavioral therapy skills. I think those are like life lessons, what you learn in kindergarten, and then in middle school, you learn DBT. Right. And then also, I think there's so much value in different stages of the 12 steps, because especially the men that I know who have been through those programs, then when I become friends with them and I talk with them, it's as if they just can connect at such a deeper, healthier level.
100%. Yes, 100%. And listen, there's and I've come to learn that there's a two-edged sword to that. So you connect with yourself and you're able, therefore, to connect with other people. And what you come to find out, at least my experience, I think this is the experience of others, is you become more lonely because there are so few people who know how to connect at that level.
Oh, that's interesting.
So like your friend circle and your like romantic relationships, they can really narrow because you realize, like, oh, I've done so much work on me. I am able to go so deep. And not in some sort of like egotistical, you just know the work you've done. And you realize that if you're not kind of on the same frequency of other people who've done that same kind of work, you just don't want to be around them. Rainer Maria Rilke, my favorite poet's got this quote where he says, I want to be around people who know secret things or no one at all. And it's sort of like you are around people who are bearing their souls in recovery, and you realize, like, I can't do small talk anymore, man. Like, I cannot do small talk. I got to be around people doing real stuff. I can't do this anymore. Like, you're attracted to different things, so.
Oh my gosh. If I had to be the host of a podcast that was on small talk, that would be, once again, I couldn't do it. I would say, no, absolutely not. I cannot handle small talk because I'm kind of like, what's the point? And also, I will say this, a lot of people, most people who know me don't get this, but I am absolutely one of those introverts who turns on being an extrovert, but it's very exhausting for me to be an extrovert. And so for me to go into an environment and turn on and be an extrovert and collaborate in that, and then have to do small talk at that point, I'm just like, oh my gosh, this is nails on a chalkboard. Yes. I would probably rather clean toilets in a men's prison than do that.
Yeah. I mean, I get it. I just, it becomes a boundary issue at this point. Like, we talk about boundaries all the time, right? But it's like, okay, well, boundary with my time is I'm just not going to hang around folks who aren't, we have to some degree, but I'm just not going to spend my quality time around people who are not investing in the things I'm investing in and who aren't interested in going to a certain depth,
So what would you say, and I love that you brought up some of the poetry, because I saw that you were a poet yourself. So perhaps you can send us a poem or two to include in the outro, and maybe I'll include it. I don't know. We'll see what I can talk you into doing. I'm pretty good at sales when it comes to this kind of stuff. So we'll see what I can talk you into doing. But yeah, so you were in education and you worked in the church, and you had these events, and you realized this sex and love addiction, which I think is way more common than people realize at varying degrees, obviously. And then you tell me how that story went forward. So then did you then decide to go and get your education in therapy, like what was your motivation to say, what I want to do with the next phase of my life is to be able to post motivational or educational things on Instagram that align with what your mission is, and to be able to help people and to be able to help teens, families with teens that have addiction problems? Like, what was that switch in you?
I got, when I was at bottom, no one or no place was helping me except for therapy and starting. That's the only place I felt connected to and seen and heard. And I've always had a heart for people. The teacher in me has always been there, so wanting people to transform and change. And so that's always been there. And those two things converged when I was sort of in these crisis months and years. So initially that was the spark, is like, I'm only getting help. I'm only being helped and feeling helped in this place. So therefore I want to help other people too. And, it pairs well with my desire to serve others and watch other people transform and, but then, so much of my story is relational. So then I was in this relationship that ended last year that was, I find that our relationships become not only mirrors of, like, external mirrors of what's going on internally, right? But they're sort of torches or flashlights into the areas that need the most work. And this was a relationship in which I was very much in love and connected, but also very troubled. And it was very hard, and had a lot of hope and dreams and all that. And so I didn't start making content until that ended. When it ended, it was completely, I didn't see it coming. And it just really broke me and unearthed this sadness, man. I mean, like, I had this depression and this sadness and this anxiety that I think it was just building up over years and years and years, that was the catalyst for the expression. And it feels like the way I'm wired is like, when I'm in pain, I want to talk through it. And I find, and I've had other people mirror this back to me, that when I talk through it, it's helpful for them. So when I'm talking about my junk, you and your junk are like, man, that was really good.
Right.
So that's just what I started doing. I just started making content out of my pain. Like, I know this is true for me. I'm just going to talk about it. And I didn't care. I was like, it's the same as a writer. You have to adopt this mentality too. I'm going to write this thing because I want to write this thing. And if 2 people read it and only one of those 2 people like it, that's fine. I need to do it. So I just started making videos out of, like, I don't care who likes this. If anybody likes this, I'm just going to do it. It's been really cool though, because I've had a tremendous amount of feedback about people being seen and feeling like they can connect and being helped to them. So my stuff's always come out of pain. Unfortunately, I wish there were another muse, but pain seems to be my muse.
Actually, I don't think that is that uncommon. We talked about all the founders of RAN. We all met at a treatment center, and it was a treatment center that we were there for a variety of reasons. Right. So, one, Ben, the COO, he suddenly lost his daughter at age 3. And it was just, and they still don't know what caused her to suddenly pass away. And the challenges that he had, Christina was, worked in DC and had a lot of PTSD from the 9/11 and then from the Capital City riots. And she listens to every single episode. So I'm going to get something wrong about this. So I'm just going to stop talking about Christina. And then she's amazing. So hers was PTSD. I was the victim of a kidnapping and hostage situation. And so I was at this treatment center because one of the ways I dealt with the nightmares was first to drink. So I went to rehab, and then I just stopped eating. So then I went to what I called eating disorder camp. So I met them when I was in eating disorder camp, and several other people were there for depression, suicidal ideations, other challenges with alcohol. And yet all of us were sitting at a table one morning, and we said, where is Sarah, who used to drink coffee with us? And someone said, oh, her insurance suddenly dropped her yesterday. And so for listeners, if you haven't listened to enough of these episodes, what can be common, especially in treatment diagnoses such as this. So if you have alcoholism, there are set programs for a set period of time. And so you typically enter into a program and you know the length of the program, typically,
Right.
not always. But for some of these other challenges, then oftentimes the insurance will review your case every 10 days.
Right.
And then they'll either make a decision if they're going to give you another 10 days. And if they say no, you oftentimes have to leave the very next day.
Yeah.
Which is traumatizing for the individual, okay,
Right.
but also traumatizing for everyone else around them, because we're constantly thinking, oh, wait, when we're asking each other, when's your 10-day review? Are you going to have to leave? And so you can't really focus on healing when that's the mechanism that's set up. And so here we all were there with pain for a different reason.
Yeah.
And then through the pain and the fear of seeing what happened to Sarah,
Right.
I'm just using that name, but to this individual, we all said, okay, we don't know how much of an impact we can make, but we can't just sit here and not do something about it. And that was the foundation of RAN, was to be able to have an educational piece and the work we're doing to try and create grants and scholarships for individuals to be able to have a true healing therapeutic process. Because several of us, including myself and Ben, the COO, I'll talk about the two of us just because we've mentioned it on a previous episode, but because we were able to do the work, and much to what you're talking about, Corey, is that we were able to then come back into society and live very fulfilling lives. I mean, I'm moving back to Atlanta. I'm going to be COO of a company there I'm super excited about.
That's cool.
And had I not had that opportunity, I mean, I didn't want to go and do anything. I didn't want to talk to anyone. It was debilitating. And I didn't want to talk out loud. So when I'm in pain, I don't want to talk to anyone. I just want to crawl under a rock, right? So I think also that for individuals like myself that are in that scenario, when we can watch something or hear something where somebody else can talk out loud about it, the power for someone like me is I can say, okay, I may not have the courage, or I might not be at a state right now to be that vocal, but I relate to what he or she or they said.
Yes. Yeah. Well said. Yeah, that's it. And, the work with the families that I do, obviously we arrive to the places we addictively end up because of family origin stuff. And so once I started really doing deep work, I was able to connect a lot of inner child healing that I needed, which brought me back to really looking at my family of origin, which then sort of attracted me to other families whose teens are in exact treatment center, exactly like you're talking about, set number of days, all this. And these families sort of thinking like, well, my adolescent boy who's got the narcotic problem or the alcohol addiction, whatever, like they're the problem. And me sort of breaking the news to the family is like, no one got up on a random, your son didn't get up on a random Tuesday and think, I'm going to destroy my life today. Like this all came out of a context, and that family's in a lot of pain and there's a lot to work through. And so, that attracted me to family system pain as well. And I love working with couples for that same reason. There's always some pain that needs healing. There's always something to unpack. But yeah, you're absolutely right.
Family systems pain. We talked, episode 13, Chrissy Clark of Ripple Ranch, we talked about the link between childhood trauma and addiction. I love that you just said that. And then Janine, I'm looking back, I think Janine was in episode 8, so living beyond mental illness and therapy burnout. We talk a lot about what you said about the community, because she used this metaphor of, if you take, I'm not going to get it right because that feels like forever ago, but it was something like if you take a sick tree and you put it in a nursery and you heal it, okay, but then you take it after it's quote unquote healed in theory, and then you put it back into that poisoned soil. I don't know that I want to use poison, because listeners, I don't want you to think that I think, but this toxic
unhealthy
environment,
soil, right?
Unhealthy soil is a little bit better, right? Then that tree is just going to get sick again. But if there's a way to, when you take that tree and put it in the nursery and you give it the nutrients, the tools, whatever modalities that particular tree needs to live its best life, and then at the same time, you figure out how to improve the soil, how to improve the conditions around it. So then when you bring the communities back together, that's how families heal. That's how couples heal. That's how every individual involved has the opportunity to live their best life.
That's it. No, you said it. That's it. Yeah.
That is so cool. Okay. Yeah. So you're on Instagram doing video snippets, video reels, I guess. I'm not, I'm not the best. Taylor's going to listen to this and say, you got it wrong.
I'm just good. I'm talented. I feel like I'm good at saying the thing. I'm not good at like all the jargon and the marketing. Okay. I just like start recording stuff.
Love it. Love it. Okay. And so right now, and then I'll also include in the show notes, but what is your handle on Instagram for all the listeners who are like, and first off, listeners, you remember, I will have already said what the 3 C's are. You have to listen to the full episode. So you're allowed to pause this episode and go look up and follow Corey right now, but you have to come back to listen to the rest of the episode. Okay. How do they find you then on your social media platforms that you
I can just search my name, Corey Latta, but my username, I guess, which is the literary therapist. And it's just this, I mostly talk about just therapy things and relationship things. I spend a lot of my time just talking about relationship, but I've got this love of literature, and I feel like literature has all these insights into the human condition that a lot of people in the mental health world don't really tap into or avail themselves. So I will sort of tie in a quote or a poem or, a bit of a story that I feel like really captures what it is I'm talking about. So it's the literary therapist. Yeah.
I love that. So when I was in treatment at Cottonwood in Tucson, Dr. I don't know if I'm going to butcher his name, but Charles Gillespie, I believe is his name. And one of the workshops that he did was literature and poetry and healing through that. Yeah. And so we studied several poets, and then we also then wrote our own little excerpts. Yes. And I think that's so powerful because we talk about all the time. There is not one, every individual is unique. There is not one tool. If there was one tool that was just like a magic wand for everyone, well, then we wouldn't have any mental health crises. We wouldn't have any addictions. But I love just this different avenue because, wow, if listeners can say, I've tried X, Y, and Z, nothing's working. Hey, here is something different to try. And we already know there's so much research that journaling is so powerful. So if journaling is so powerful, that ties into so much of what you're sharing.
Yeah. So what I was at the Winter Symposium, which is this big trauma and addiction conference in Colorado Springs. And I talked about this. One common denominator with anyone in recovery, early in recovery, or in the height of their addiction is they're detached from their stories. They have a fragmented experience with themselves, and they have a fragmented experience with their stories. And stories are a work of meaning. Stories coherent. Like when you watch a film, it's got a beginning, a middle, and an end. And if we see a movie that's not well done, we don't like it, right? We protest. Like we want resolution. And all of our lives are meant to have the sort of the arc of resolution. But addiction just disrupts the plot completely and displaces you out of your own story. So a lot of what I do is, hey, let's look at your relationship to your own story. Do you know your story? Do you know how to tell your story? Like I do this exercise with people where I'll play, there's a song by I'll play a lot of songs, but there's this one song by Max Richter called The Nature of Daylight. And it's just instrumental. It's the saddest freaking song that's ever been. And I'll show people the first lines of some really famous memoirs. And I'll sort of make this point that I think a good memoir starts at the point of the author's greatest pain.
Yes.
So while we're listening to this song, can you write what would be the first line of your memoir? There was 100 people in the room at the Winter Symposium, and I did it. It was 7:30 in the morning, by the way. I was like, no one's going to show up. There's 100 people there. And I did this exercise, and I thought, man, if I could just get like 1 or 2 people to share their lines, I said, is anyone brave enough to, there were probably 70 people that shot their hands up. They could not wait. And in 5 minutes, they had written the first line of their memoir. They could not wait to talk about their story. And it's because most of them had been divorced from their own stories. They hadn't thought about their stories. So that's what I'm really passionate about. Literature is just a way to help express what's going on in us and to give us a framework and a means to attaching to our own story.
And I'm thinking about this because I'm thinking in the treatment centers I've been in and some of the struggles some individuals have shared with, because in that 6-month period when I was when I was in residential treatment, recovering from the kidnapping, I went to 3 different treatment centers, and all 3 of them used different techniques of how do you document your story, right? And is it a timeline? Is it, just snippets? Are you just taking one part of it and you're just going to talk about the one part? And one of the things that I found was valuable is that if you have the opportunity in a treatment center specifically, if you have a really challenging story, to experiment with these different modalities in a safe environment where you're safe versus trying to do it and then just go home and go about your everyday life.
Yeah. You need guidance.
Yeah, you need guidance. You need a safe place. You need support.
Yeah.
Because, and the reason I'm saying this is that some individuals, as you mentioned, you'd forgotten that you had this. Joshua Young, who leads our Between the Lines blog club series, he also was the author of Craving Recovery. He talks in that book about how he became an alcoholic, an addict. And whenever his wife or anyone would say to him, were you sexually abused as a child? He was like, no, absolutely not. And then later when he finally was able to say yes, and he called it his shadow monster, that's the name he put in it. And he talks about it in several episodes. The healing was finally able to occur, but he pushed it down so much. He didn't want to tell that part of his story, but that was the part of the story that was underneath that rock that kept him in addiction, that kept him in the horrible parts of life.
Yes. I mean, when I went to the Bridge to Recovery in Bowling Green, Kentucky, which is like, happy to plug them all day long. They do an unbelievable work. And, I couldn't figure out like my role in my relationships, particularly this relationship that ended last year. And, it was unhealthy on both sides. I'll just say that. But I was sifting through what I felt like was betrayal and hurt and abandonment and all that. But I had a part to play in this thing. But I couldn't figure out why I was so reactive at times or why I was so avoidant at times. And I really couldn't figure out why I was so dang sad. I was like, this is just a breakup. I feel like my world is like, it just felt, I was crazy. I felt crazy. Well, I started to get with someone who could do some deeper work and did like EMDR around some trauma. And I started to recall some memories that I don't recall ever recalling before. And then slowly bits of my story started to come into focus. And then when I was at the Bridge doing this inner child work, it just it was like someone had inserted deleted scenes from my film strip. And it's like all this unconscious area of my life was producing all this conscious activity in the form of relational. I mean, honestly, it's like, I wish I could have that relationship back, or I wish I could have, not necessarily, I mean, I wish I could be myself in former phases of life as I am now, because I can almost chart my life pre-recovery or pre-treatment, post-treatment. And I am, 43 years old and a therapist saying this, like, I thought I had sort of done my work. Not the case. Carl Jung has this great quote: until we make the unconscious conscious, it will rule our lives and we will call it fate.
Oh my gosh, I love that. I'm glad it's recorded so that I don't have to write it down so perfectly right now.
But that was it. Like, all this unconscious stuff was controlling my relational life and my internal life and my reaction to pain. Like, I go through this breakup and I start just so like, I want the relationship back and I don't want to be alone. And it just felt, I was manic, and I was like, what? And I was not consciously aware of some of these choices or thoughts. well, there's this unconscious part of me that had not been healed and touched, right, and exposed until that unconscious became conscious. It was ruling my life. And I just was like, well, this is the way it is. I mean, I was calling it fate, as Jung says. Yeah.
Which there are so many different, when we talk about allowing people to talk about these experiences versus, I was brutally abused as a child. And in my family, it was like, oh, things like this don't happen in this family. Let's just put it underneath the rug, which is so common. It is so common. And then we wonder why individuals then grow up and have relational problems or have addictions and have, all of these things. When I was in treatment at the refuge, I read the book, finally, The Body Keeps the Score. And I've talked so many times in reading it, and I'm moving cross country. And so I've been going through all my books, putting them in boxes. And I found that book and I have all these tabs on the outside and every page is highlighted. And I remember reading it. And I'm really glad I read it when I was in treatment and not at home. But when I read it, I thought, wow, all of what I considered were my life failures, which were all relationship. I've been married and divorced multiple times. And all of those were, of course, I would behave in that way with the way that I was raised, the physical, emotional neglect and sexual abuse as a child before the age of 13. Of course, I would develop these things. And here I had gone 30-something year, 30 years, 32 years, and thought and blamed myself the entire time and said, okay, I don't understand how I can be so successful in this area.
Yes.
But then in this one area of my life, all I do is fuck it up. There's not another word, right?
That was me.
Yeah.
I got 2 masters and a PhD by the time I was 30 and had published a couple of books. Like I was so ambitious and driven and successful and but my God, I mean, like my relational life was just a disaster. And you said, blaming yourself. I don't know if this is your experience. Part of my disease or addiction was I was attracting people, and this was part of the pain of that last relationship, that also blamed me. Like they did not care to sort of see me in the context of my story. As a matter of fact, they became co-villains with my own shame to point at my unhealth, seemingly sort of unaware of their own stuff. So there's this pile on top of a pile on top of a pile of shame. And I think at the heart of addiction, is shame. And there's an addiction to shame. Until that shame is alleviated and really, if you can even, until it's unearthed and befriended and worked through and whatever, verb you want to use there, you're stuck. I mean, you're going to be. So so much of my work, and it sounds like yours and so many other people's, is like understanding how I came to be who I am, what place I play in my story, what sort of supporting characters and cast have I recruited in my story, and what voices are they lending toward, an agreement or disagreement with my own shame. And then being able to be gracious with myself. I mean, God,
I love that.
The compassion I had to develop, and that was inner child work for me. I could not do it. I still can't do it with adult me. I can't. Like I am very bad to myself as adult Corey. I don't care about him. I will get him in a million relationships that will end terribly. I will do terrible things. But once I really started to tap into and reacquaint myself with 8-year-old me, then things change. And that again was pretty recent. Where it's like, no, I'm not going to put him in that relationship. I'm not doing that. That was the compassion toward myself and grace toward myself was not adult me. It was inner child me, which then determines how I live with adult me.
Oh my gosh. And I have so many thoughts. Okay. First, thank Angela. Okay. So first thought is I was just listening to a book that was talking about one of the extra values of journaling is to use it to journal and write down the things that or you, Corey, adult you, say to yourself, right? Just write those down.
Right.
And then take a step back and read them as if you're saying them to your 8-year-old self.
Yes.
or as if you're saying them to your friend or to your child. And you suddenly, over time and repetition, I mean, nothing in life, we didn't develop these habits and these things overnight, right?
Nope.
So we're not going to overcome these challenges overnight.
Nope.
But then over time, starting to identify the way, the self-talk that we do and the impact it has on our psyche, which is so powerful. It is so powerful. And do that over time. I also, when you're talking about inner child work, okay, so Janine, who was on episode 8, was my therapist at the refuge. And so I arrive, and one of the girls that was there with me said, "Oh, she's going to make you do all this inner child stuff."
Yeah.
And I was brutally abused as a child. I mean, I have zero good memories of my childhood.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember, I mean, I was just really kind of being a bitch. I was just like, I'm not happy to be here.
Mm-hmm.
You know, my life sucks. I didn't deserve this. Woe is me. And heck no. And so she was talking about like these little baby dolls and this stuff. And I was like, I'm going to put my inner child at the bottom of a well. And it became this joke. Everyone was just like, and my therapist was like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do to this person who wants to put her inner child at the bottom of a well? But my initial reaction to talking about that, like I thought, why do I want to talk about that? Because in my head, I thought, look, I escaped that. I went off to college. I have my engineering degree. I had already been COO of my first company, highly successful, graduated from Georgia Tech. And that inner child stuff was done. I didn't I don't want to talk about that stuff, right? I only want to talk about the kidnapping, and I only want to heal from the kidnapping, the hostage, and all the trauma from there.
Right.
And so many of us can say it's not until really delve into all of those things and figure out. Also, I like what you said, figure out our parts to it, because there are parts in my life now that it's healthy for me to like maybe journal my self-talk, but also look at my situations and say, okay, let's take a step back and say, what is truly my part? Yes. What is truly an actor or character I've invited into my story that may or may not need to continue being in my story?
Yes.
Right. And own what's mine and work towards mine, but also own only, having those healthy boundaries to only allow the quote unquote characters in my story that I really want to be in there. I have the power to do that now.
That's right. No, that's it. Yeah. James Hollis has this book. He's a Jungian depth psychologist, and he's got this book that really, I've mentioned this book so many times, it's cliche at this point, but it's called The Middle Passage. And he basically says there are two adulthoods. The first adulthood is the adulthood you're born into. It's the life your parents live. We don't have any choice over that. Where we're born, how abusive the family system we're born into is, belief systems, all that. And then we sort of go on for a while until we hit essentially midlife and we realize this ain't working. And then we have a choice to go through this middle passage into a second adulthood. And that second adulthood is one of choice. It's like, I don't believe what mom and dad believe. I'm not going to parent that way. My love life is not going to look like that love life. I think I want to do this. I think I want to choose that. And it's that place of choice, which can only healthily come from a place of healing. Like you're going to choose unhealthy options 10 times out of 10 if you're unhealthy internally, right? But as you do the work and you get toward, so you gravitate toward healthier choices, that second adulthood is the one that you want. It's the life you want to live, not the life you had to live. So that just came up when you described that.
No, and it's so true. I think also, I've used this example on one of the previous episodes, but I've been able now to identify some common patterns or the reason I react to certain people in certain ways. So the company that I'm leaving, I had this horrible experience of a year and a half that I was not a good fit for them. My personality was not a good fit for the rest of the C-suite. And one of the members, in many of the way our interactions, this is not his fault, but in many of the interactions, I saw him in my head without realizing it. In my head, I felt as if he was treating me the same way that my father treated me when I was a child.
Right.
And so I would react emotionally. Like I had this one example when he was yelling at me for something that I did not do wrong. So I'm sitting there going, I didn't do this wrong, which reminded me of so much of my childhood. Right. And I was able in that moment to like realize that my heart rate was increasing and I felt like an elephant was on my chest and my head was starting to hurt. My vision was starting to feel blurry. And I was able to then do some of the skills that I've learned, like feel my feet on the ground, feel my fingers and calm down and realize, look, and this is not your dad talking to you. It is a colleague who, for whatever reason, he is perhaps having a very bad day. And this is the way he's expressing it. But it is not this father-daughter thing. And I had spent so much of my life reacting to other people in the same way I reacted as a child. Yes. And before I was never able to identify it. I was just like, that person's an asshole. Versus then being able to say, okay, well, they have their own difficulties, but I can now choose, which is what you said, choose, the people, choose your reactions, choose your decisions. I can now, with that knowledge, choose and identify, this is why I'm reacting. Yep. I'm not going to judge myself because I'm reacting this way, because that's not appropriate. And instead, I'm going to pause and choose how I want to, and as an adult, react in the situation.
My favorite sayings is no change but the self. No change but the self. Like, I can't change how you treat me. I can't change how you act toward me, but I can change self, which then transforms a reaction. And I can become a proactive rather than a reactive person. But that's it. No change but the self.
So when you're talking to, one of the things I'm very interested in, because a lot of individuals talk about the challenges of going into treatment and then going home. Mm-hmm. And one, they struggle because they're like, I've done all this healing. Why do you not trust me? Or why, this big backlash when you go home. And also, this expectation of the family is expecting this person to come back and be this perfect human being or something. How do you work when you're working with the families and with their teens? Mm-hmm. What techniques do you use to try and set up that transition for success?
I default, several, but I sort of start with and kind of keep going with, what do you feel? What do you need? What do you feel? What do you need? What do you feel? What do you need? I want to call attention to the internal process all the time. Again, there's all kinds of unconscious stuff happening. Can we make it conscious? So I will pound away at these questions until people are forced to reckon with them in a different way. And then it's the struggling with those questions oftentimes. I don't know what I feel. I don't know what I need. That becomes the work. Okay, in your unawareness of what you feel and what you need, what do you notice? And people can identify that. They'll start to be able to notice spiked heart rates. And I'll watch them, right? I'll sort of see, like, it's really interesting. You kind of diverted your gaze when we talked about that, or saw a change in your body. Or I was working with a client who's very successful, sort of COO, and she was talking about something going on with her son. That was the issue. But I was asking her how she felt. She said, well, I feel frustrated because when he does this, and then went straight back out to his stuff. And I said, she probably went on for 10 minutes. I said, did you notice, I just asked one question about what was going on here. And you started narrating out there about, I said, so let's just sort of ask that externalization part to just quietly sit right here. And let's bring it back to you. And let me ask again, like, what's that feel like for you? Well, I guess it feels this way because, last week, and then right back out again to all the circumstances and okay, that narration is a defense. What do you know? And just trying to bring people back to what's going on here, because no change but the self. Because if you don't figure out what you feel, you can't figure out what you need. If you don't know what you need, you're not going to know how to live. And all your choices are going to be unconscious, right? And we're back to this whole. So most of my work begins with identifying feelings, identifying needs, And then that becomes one of the things I do is psychodrama, like experiential stuff. So again, the creative expression, and those.
Can you describe, I know what psychodrama is, but can you describe for the listeners that don't know, what is psychodrama? Like how would we do that?
It can include a lot of things, but reconstructions called recons. We'll reconstruct family scenes or hard moments. We'll have you sort of play the part of your dad. We'll have somebody play your part. We'll reenact that traumatic moment when you were 16 years old. We'll sort of do positioning where you'll get your body up and you'll stand here and you'll talk about your truth, and this person will stand there, and we'll kind of move closer to each other. We just basically start rehearsing and dramatizing in our bodies the things that we usually just keep in our heads. So we're enacting and reenacting scenes that we want to change, and we're relying on the physicality and the dramatic reenactment of these things to unearth, and it always does, unearth feelings and sort of reveal to us what's going on in ways that we will never get to just intellectualizing.
So how do you work through the defensive? So you're doing the psychodrama, okay? And let's just say I was doing this with my parents, okay? And so I'm playing the role of my father, and my father's playing the role of me. And I behave in a way I feel as if he behaved, right? How right. And he sees it, and he's just like, she's totally full of it. I never behaved that way, and goes into a mechanism like outside of the psychodrama of defense and feeling attacked, right. And feeling like, okay, now everything is being blamed. Because I think of, I'm as a parent, when I think of I have a special needs daughter, yeah. And when I have frustrations with her, when you were saying, what do you think? What do you feel? What do you think? What do you feel? I was thinking about her. I was thinking, okay, oftentimes what I'm thinking and feeling is, where did I let her down? Was I not a good mom? Did I not get the resources that she needed to be successful? Mm-hmm. That is what I'm thinking and feeling inside. And I wouldn't have been able to realize that years and years ago, but that's kind of my reaction. And so I've moved past this point of feeling like being blamed or as if I'm not a good mom or stuff like that in a realm where I need to defend myself kind of thing. So how do you deal with in those scenarios where there's like now this really tense moment?
You let it get tense. For one thing, is like psychodrama is really messy. And let me tell you, I've seen some crazy visceral experiences come out.
I can imagine.
Spasmodic experiences where people are losing their stuff. And I've been on the receiving end of it. I've done it. That's what needs to come out. Let's go. Let's get in it. Most therapists are scared to death of it because they don't know what to do when things get, and I'm sort of like, all right, let's go, baby. Like, I'm here for this. So you got to be willing to it's about to get messy. I mean, I've seen 50-year-old CEOs have breakdowns where I'm like, we might have to call the paramedics. I mean, this guy's crying so hard he can't breathe in the middle of psychodrama. You just got to know what you're doing and kind of ride that wave. But you said, what do you think? What do you feel? But I want to point out, I never ask, what do you think?
Oh, what did you ask? What
do you feel? What do you need?
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
You see how my brain translated the need to think?
I've lost the session. I've lost you. That's the problem is you're thinking all the time. I'm thinking all the time. That's my primary defense.
Yeah.
Right? But what do you feel and what do you need? And that what do you need question is so vulnerable and brings you to the place of dependency and powerlessness, maybe better than any other question. And even to watch someone wrestle with, I don't know what I need, because we're so terrible at asking for what we need.
Right.
That question is so it's what do you feel to get the what do you think question is, I don't want that anywhere in this room.
Oh, well, hey, listeners, you're welcome. I'm really happy that I was able to screw that up so that we could all learn from it, myself as well. So then, okay, so if I were going to go back to what do I feel, what do I need? Yeah. Okay, so then would this be, and I'm not going to do this as trying to be a perfectionist, but I'm thinking about this. What do I need? I need as a human, and I need affirmation that I did the best that I could. I need ideas that take it away from a performance as a mom to me. I need, I often, like, I need to feel love. I need to feel like I love this. This is so much fun. I'm not sure what I need.
Well, so there you go. So like in a couple session, just because you have a need doesn't mean your partner is able to meet that need. But you being able to identify it is really, really key to intimacy. Into me, see, this is what's going on in me, right? Most of the needs we can actually give ourselves, and most of the needs feel satisfied just by being able to say, I need it. Like it's so powerful just to be able to say, oh, this is what I need, right? But to not know what you need because we're so untrained in asking ourselves is itself part of the work. Like it's vulnerable and opening and painful and healing to be able to say, I have a need. I don't know what it is. Let me get reacquainted with that. And that's when the inner child work often comes in, because usually it's not the adult you that needs something. It's the little you that needs something. And,
right.
And it always goes back to belonging, affirmation, validation, to be held, to be loved, and those needs we can have met in one form or another, because they're all very primal and they're all sort of, that basic hierarchy of needs. We're just so untrained in being able to name them because we're so dang defended, and we're too autonomous, we're too independent, we're so disconnected from vulnerability and need because we're too successful, or we're too in our heads, or we're too performative, or whatever. So that need question is one of dependency.
Well, and I can only speak for myself, and but as you were talking about the idea of need, my gut reaction was, as a child, it felt very dangerous to need anything from my parents, because that then led to pain and abuse and more trauma. Yes. So I learned at a very young age, if I don't need something from someone else and I just depend on myself, then I can survive. So it was a survival mechanism that I learned over years and years and years. So I've built this idea of, no, I don't need you to do anything. I don't need to feel anything. I have no needs. And trying to then, as you mentioned, goes back to inner child work. And my inner child is not still at the bottom of a well. So listeners, don't worry about that.
Good. Good.
Well, this is amazing. Okay. So one, we will include the outro, but there are a couple of things I like to say as we wrap up. One is there an area you're really passionate about that you really wanted to talk about today, wanted listeners to hear that we haven't covered, that we need to make sure we cover?
No, I think we hit it. Like families, couples, and then that story, inner child work for sure. And then the work around story. Those are the things that I most love. So yeah, we covered those.
Do you have any inner child work books that are your favorite?
Yeah, there's one called Healing the Inner Child by Charles Whitten. It's kind of a classic in the field. But the other thing I'd say is healing in terms of books and resources is like kids' books or comic books or books that actually are written for kids. Like, watch Harry Potter, read, honestly, it's like lots of times we're so detached from works of the imagination and works of escape, like healthy escape. That's kind of what we need. So yeah, Healing the Inner Child is a great resource. And there are others that are really good, but I found actually going into your imagination and getting back to the things that you like as a kid, just like segmenting out times to do that's why they give you a doll or stuffed animal. That's why it's this objectification of something that represents. So anytime you can kind of enter that world tangibly or artistically, I think that's as healing or more healing than any book around it.
Well, and I think as well is that I know myself, when I watch things now with the idea of seeing some of these underlying things, I learn so much more about it. Yes. And we had Sandra Rostarola on an episode, and she wrote this book, Making Friends with Monsters, which I think is probably reverse.
Yeah.
This book is amazing. It's a young adult book, but it teaches, I think, as I've said before, I submitted this to Oprah's book club. I think everyone should read this book. And it teaches individuals how to talk about emotions in a healthy way through the story of a 12-year-old boy and all the emotions and him making them in his head like this monster and this monster and this. It's totally amazing. But exactly like what you were saying.
About. Yeah, that's exactly it. Books like that is what I would recommend.
Love it. Okay. So a requirement is your favorite motivational quote. This is going to be hard for you. Did you pick one that you're going to share? Or you're allowed to have two?
Motivational. I kind of like dark, moody quotes. Okay. So,
or your favorite life motto or.
That same poet, Rilke, I'm really fond of talking about. He's got a collection called Letters to a Young Poet. It's 10 actual letters he wrote to a younger poet. And I think it's letter 4 of that collection. He tells the guys writing to stop looking for answers and to instead learn to live the question. And in learning to live the question, maybe perhaps one day an answer will be given to you. But if the answer were given to us right now, we wouldn't be able to live it anyway. And the whole point of life is to keep exploring and questioning and living. So learn to live the question. That concept has meant more to me than maybe anything.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Okay. So on Instagram, it's the literary therapist, correct?
Literary therapist, yeah.
Yes. Nailed it. Alrighty. This has been amazing. Thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us today with your coffee and conversation. We hope you've been encouraged and learned something from today's story. To learn more about today's guest, please check out our show notes for more details. Now it's time to remember to like this episode, subscribe, and turn on your notifications to ensure you do not miss future episodes. Recovery Advocate Network envisions a world where individuals with mental health challenges receive comprehensive and effective treatment without the worry of financial burdens to themselves or their families, all without the stigmas often present in society. We are proud that every individual worked with RAN does so on a 100% volunteer basis. You can support the mission by making a financial donation via PayPal or Venmo, or email donate@recoveryadvocatenetwork.org if you would like to donate items for our next fundraising auction. Please visit our website at www.recoveryadvocatenetwork.org to learn more. Now, stay in the loop about upcoming events, future episodes, and more by following us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter X, TikTok, LinkedIn, and all major podcast platforms. As a reminder, the experiences and advice expressed in this episode are the host and guest's own personal stories and do not represent the opinions of any organization mentioned. RAN is passionate about opening the doors for all voices and experiences, not just those expressed in any particular podcast. If you want to share your experiences or expertise, we encourage you to be a future guest by emailing us at podcast@recoveryadvocatenetwork.org or submit a blog by emailing blog@recoveryadvocatenetwork.org. We also encourage you to comment on the episode so that we can continue to provide content that is most beneficial to the community. How do you do that? Visit our website at www.recoveryadvocatenetwork.org, and in the top right corner, click that comment button and comment. So listeners, what do you need to do? Pause what you're doing, subscribe, follow us. Please give us a like and a 5-star rating, write some meaningful comments, and most importantly, share these episodes with your friends. You never know whose heart you will touch, so please be a part of a reason someone has new hope today. If this episode was triggering to you, we encourage you to contact your support system, therapist, national and community support groups, the Global Crisis Text Line by texting 741-741, and or if in the U.S., dialing 988 to reach the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. If you're in the U.S. and need additional resources such as shelter, support group resources, transportation, food, and or a safe, confidential path out of physical or emotional domestic abuse, please call 211 or visit www.211info.org for assistance. Now, we know you are very busy, and we are grateful that you said yes to sharing time with us today. If you stuck to our 3 C's of engagement and listened to the full episode, Then visit the podcast section of our website and leave the comment about the podcast, and you'll be entered to win an autographed copy of one of the books from one of our book club series, as well as a Coffee and Conversation coffee mug. So thanks again. Until next time, back to your coffee.